For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
For the past 1 week, all of you, I'm sure, are listening to debates, discussions, arguments over the proposed plan of theaterization of Indian Armed Forces. What is theaterization? What are joint commands? And why integration or jointness in the three services or the three armed forces is needed is the topic of this week's Simply Nitin. I'm Nitin Gokhale. So theaterization or joint commands of the Indian Armed Forces has been under discussion ever since the government appointed General Bipin Rawat, the first Chief of Defence Staff, and created the Department of Military Affairs under the Ministry of Defence on 1st January 2020, nearly 18 months ago. The first phase of higher defence reforms in the Indian military was the creation of the post of CDS and appointing a CDS, and of course creating the Department of Military Affairs. The next stage, as envisaged by the government, is to create joint commands, getting all the three services, Army, Navy, Air Force, under one commander for optimization of resources as well as more effective command and control during operations and for better coordination. That's what the CDS is planning and trying to execute by discussing with the other two services and coming up with a plan for first creating structures for joint commands and then of course starting to operationalize them in a time frame of maybe 1 year from 15th August 2022 when it will complete 1 year of announcement of the creation of joint commands, which is expected to happen on 15th August this year by the Prime Minister from the ramparts of the Red Fort. But what exactly are joint commands or theatre commands? And what exactly is the history of jointness or integration of the three armed services or the armed forces in India? The world over, militaries have struggled to get all the three forces together and operate together. In fact, the nearest example one can look at is actually 35 years old, when the United States enacted the Goldwater-Nichols Act for reorganization of the Defense Department in the United States. It had just one aim underlying the entire act, which is running into nearly 86 pages. And that is to solve the problem of getting all the three services to work together effectively and for greater military impact. In one line, that was the purpose of the Goldwater-Nichols Act. Since then, 35 years later, it hasn't really worked fully well, but it certainly made the three armed forces in the United States work together and optimize resources. In India's case, the history is rather checkered. If you look at India's military history from 1947, there was no concept of jointness or integration. All the three services worked in silos. They had their own planning, they had their own staffing, they had their own acquisition procedures and even acquisition plans. Although, on 1st November 1947, a joint secretary level officer headed the military wing who reported to the cabinet secretary and sort of acted as a coordinator between the armed forces and the cabinet. Later, of course, the military wing was merged into the Ministry of Defence when it was created. And then, of course, Ministry of Defence or the Defence Secretary acted as the coordinating officer between the three armed forces and the cabinet through the Defence Minister or the Raksha Mantri. Till 1964, the planning, the acquisition, the force structuring, the force projection, all that used to happen in the MOD or the Department of Defence under the MOD. But from 1964, the government decided to have a long-term view for at least budget planning and force projection. Came the 1971 war, and all the three services acquitted themselves very well, although there were differences of opinion between the leaders, General Sam Manekshaw, later Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw, Admiral S.M. Nanda, and Air Chief Marshal P.C. Lal. Because of the success of the 1971 war, in which India secured its greatest military triumph since 1947 and even now, the problems were brushed under the carpet. But the services never were really together in planning or in force projection. The need was not felt. But came the 1999 war in Kargil. Then, after the war ended, the government of the day realized that the three services needed to come together, have a common vision, and of course common planning. So post Kargil, the government set up the K. Subramaniam Committee, or the Kargil Review Committee, under the chairmanship of K. Subramaniam, father of the current External Affairs Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar. That committee recommended that several changes needed to be brought for functioning of the armed forces for the 21st century. So the government set up a group of ministers, and that group of ministers, after considerable study and in-depth discussions, came up with recommendations for not just the armed forces but also for the central armed police forces like the BSF, the ITBP, the CRPF, and then of course some restructuring took place. As a result of the group of ministers' recommendation, the Integrated Defence Staff, Headquarter Integrated Defence Staff was created. And the head of the Integrated Defence Staff was called CISC or CISC. And it's a complicated abbreviation. It is Chief of Integrated Defence Staff to the Chiefs of Staff Committee. Let's not get into the details of that, only the military people will understand it. But a 3-star level officer by rotation from 3 services was to do joint planning for all the 3 services, and the headquarter IDS was then given charge of budget, for force projection, and also for projecting the need and the planning for the 3 forces. That happened exactly 20 years ago. In fact, it was brought into being on 1st November 2001. So this year in November, we'll be celebrating 20 years of headquarter IDS. Then there was a huge long gap. From 2001 to 2020, nothing worked as far as integration was concerned. Yes, headquarter IDS did make a difference. There was a creation of the Strategic Forces Command, which handles India's nuclear weapons, and the Andaman Nicobar Command, headquartered in Port Blair, came up as a first and only functional or operational tri-services command in India. So what happened after this huge long gap is what I'll tell you in part 2 of this program tomorrow. Of course, in the meantime, do keep watching StratNewsGlobal as well as Simply Nitin, and keep sending feedback, comments, and you will have more information about the proposed planning and the discussions that are going on about jointness and theatre commands in the next part coming up on Sunday.